All right, everybody, I'd like to thank everyone for checking back in with your man King Moon Factoids. And today it's time for a new episode of the 103 Amazing Facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. It was originally written by one Statue P. Canyon in the year 2003, and I updated, illustrated, and demonstrated it for you beginning in the year 2020. So let's go ahead and get it started, y'all. Number 39. Most Black Indians of the Western Hemisphere found themselves seduced by European lifestyle, customs, and traditions. Below that, what you're looking at is a ceremony from 1579 with Sir Francis Drake and the California Indians, where the king of the Indians was giving a headdress to Sir Francis Drake. And check out those Indians, all right? Number 40, when the American Revolutionary War broke out, Black Indians found themselves fighting against their own kinsmen. Some Black Indian nations sided with the British, while other Black Indian nations sided with the colonial rebels, aka the Americans. And below that is a portrait from 1814 by Rudolph von Steiger, that says the deputation of the Mississippi Indian tribes. And as you look around, you can see that there were various looks for the Indians at this particular time. And, no matter what anybody says, we could tell these are who you would call Black folks today. All right? So let's keep going. Number 41. After Black Indian nations helped to set up the colonial government, America, and also helped to sponsor military support for the new colonial government, Black Indian nations continued to fight and war amongst themselves, as they did before and after Europeans set foot upon the Western Hemisphere shores. So that's something that I think that we all understand today, that groups of us still fight amongst each other over a bunch of various reasons. And when the Europeans came in, saw that you had 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 tribes that were beefing, and they figured out how to play the game. They played the tribes against each other. They played the sides against each other. All right? And it's still going on today. But anyway, let's keep going. Number 42. Black Indians were not conquered by Europeans or the so-called white man. Black Indians had a rich history of intertribal warfare amongst each other that continued before and after European arrival. The intertribal warfare that existed amongst Black Indians in the Western Hemisphere was so great that it left them in a state of impotency, with impotency setting in after years and years of clan warfare, in addition to the attraction of European trinkets, customs, or traditions, and the worshiping of the god named Jesus, all assisted in paving the way for European occupancy of Black Indian lands, spirits, and their minds. And like I just was saying, the Europeans that came in, they saw what was going on, and they took advantage of the situation. So they picked one tribe to fight another tribe, and they did trades with certain tribes and not with other tribes. And this particular portrait is of the Yamasee Indians and the Yamasee Wars from 1715. And just take a look. I mean, what do those Yamasee Indians look like? Who do those Yamasee Indians look like? That's all you really have to do, is stop and look at these portraits and understand who they were at war with and why the war happened and why the results are the way that they are. Because those are most definitely who you would consider Black folks today. All right? But yet they want to tell you we're all African or African American. Number 43. After the colonial government was established, America, Black Indian nations continued to aid the colonial government with military assistance on other Black Indian nations that fought against European expansion and taking of their ancestral lands. And below that, what you have is from a book, The Indian Races of North and South America by Charles D. Wolfe Brownell, 1856. And again, like I keep saying over and over again, who are the Indians? Who are the Indians? Look at these Indians, all right? The Indians that's warring with each other look like who? They look like me. They look like you. They look like our forefathers and mothers. Those are our people. We are those people. We are the Indians. The whole reason why they call people Indians is because they were dark-skinned Indians, just like they call people Negroes. Side note, look at this. Death of King Philip. That was King Philip, and look at him. What does he look like? What does the guy that's killing him look like? All right? Let's keep going. Number 44. General Mad Anthony Wayne, aka the Black Snake, was a black Indian who served under the George Washington administration. The army of General Anthony Wayne consisted of mostly black Indians in the ranks, as did the entire colonial government army. Besides black Indians, making up the bulk of the new colonial government army, American, Moors also filled up the ranks. Okay, and below that, you're looking at the cover page of the book, and it's basically breaking down exactly what Canyon just spoke of. And I want you not to overlook the fact that they said that Moors were in the ranks and that Moors were involved in these wars, because they were. In fact, there were different groups of Moors, probably on both sides, that actually were involved. The Moors were a foreign group of also black people, how we call people black today, also black people who came here and was trying to get their piece of the pie, basically. So they made deals with the government and whoever they could that would help them help themselves. Number 45, George Washington established treaties or contracts with various black Indian nations, as well as with Moors, for military support against other black Indian nations who did not support the occupancy of the new colonial government, America. And so what you're looking at below that, on the left side, it says, one of the major diplomatic issues facing President George Washington was the conflicts between the Creek nations and Western settlers. All right, so, he made deals with the Indians, and he also made deals with the Moors, but he made deals with the Sultan of Morocco, which in turn became a deal with the Moors, a treaty of peace and friendship. That was from 1787. And that basically broke down the fact that anybody who was considered a Moor or, a sultan, subject of the Sultan of Morocco, or that was Muslim, had a little pull. All right. Number 46, the colonial government in America confiscated most black Indian lands and refused to pay black Indian warriors pensions for their military support. Now, below that, what you're looking at is a parade with black men, and then one of them has a sign up that says, "We own 250,000 farms with 20 million acres of land worth $500 million. Okay. And over again, they made deals and treaties and said, hey, we'll do this for you if you help us do that. And I'm talking about the United States government with black people, when they were calling them Negroes or Indians or whatever term they was using with them at the time. They always welched on the deal. Practically every treaty they made with the Indians, they welched on the deal. Practically everything they ever told black people they were supposed to give them for what they had done to them, they welched on the deal. And it's still happening today. Even today, our folks get used. They never get paid. They never get what they're supposed to get. And that is a problem that has not changed. And the only way it's going to change is when we change it. You do not need to be asking these folks permission to do anything. We need to be doing our thing. Because when we're doing our thing, they can't stop us, and they know that. That is what integration was about. It wasn't about helping us. It was about helping them take our money. Understand that. And they took our land too. So anyway, number 47. During the American Civil War, Black Indians joined the Confederate Army in hopes of winning to secure what little ancestral lands they had left. And below that, what you're looking at are Confederate soldiers. And the title in the picture says, the 1st Louisiana Native Guard. They are talking about Indians. These folks knew who they were, who their ancestral lineage was. They didn't get put in there called Negroes. They got called natives. All right, now look around. All of those are who you would call black folks today. Now today, when you look around, you don't see us in the mix of the people that's calling themselves Native Americans. We're not Native Americans. We aren't actually Indians. We're Aboriginal. We're indigenous Aboriginals of the Americas. We are the American Aborigines, or the original people of this land. They know that. But let's keep going. Number 48. Other black Indians joined the Union side of the American Civil War. They fought for their own objectives as well, seeking prosperity within the American system. And below that, what you're looking at is a 1881 photograph of black Seminole scouts. And the scouts were used to go out and find other Indians and go out and try to control other tribes of Indians. See, they always used us to deal with us because they can't deal with us without using another group of us. Like I keep saying over and over again, they came in and they found a way to put a wedge between two groups, or it was already a wedge between certain groups, and they used that to their advantage to get where they are today. All right, let's keep going. Number 49. Nickajack, also known as Nigger Jack, was a black Chickamauga black Indian. This ancestor led raids against the colonial rebel army, Americans, during the colonial rebel uprising, American Revolutionary War. He fought alongside of the British. His hideout was a cave in the vicinity of what is now known as Chattanooga, Tennessee. In Cobb County, Georgia, there is a park, a road, and a creek named after this great warrior. It's easy for you to look that up and see that for yourself. But I think the real moral of the story, and should be for this particular episode, is the fact that the Indians, well, let's just say the Europeans, they came in with trinkets and gifts, and it was acting friendly. And certain groups of Indians they got along with, and the Indians treated them like friends, and they helped them war with other tribes. And long story short, they mixed in with those tribes, and they took over. You know, it didn't start off as hostile as we're being told. I mean, it ultimately turned hostile, but originally they started off as friends and giving gifts.
We all know about Thanksgiving in America today: food, family, and football games. But what often gets left out of the story is the role played by the local Wampanoag Nation. They were watching when the Mayflower first landed on Cape Cod. Curious about their intentions in Wampanoag territory, they sent a man named Samoset.
Samoset was actually a sachem or a chief of the Abenaki people up in Maine. We don't know why he was in Plymouth, so there's very little we do know about him, but we do know that his name means he walks the line, which is pretty cool.
Samoset first visited the English while they were still building their settlement, calling it Plymouth. He surprises them by saying hello in English.
We don't know exactly how Samoset knew how to speak English, but most likely it was from fishermen who were heavily fishing the coast of Maine.
They actually sit him down, they give him something to drink, some food. He tells them about the area. This is Patuxet.
Samoset explains that the village of Patuxet was one of many in the Wampanoag Nation that had been wiped out by a plague a few years earlier. He leaves the English and returns with a local leader named Massasoit.
Massasoit, or Usamiquin, Massasoit is his title. Massa in our language means great or big, like Massachusetts, place of the great hills. Massasoit means great leader. His name, Usamiquin, Yellowfeather. He was the sachem or chief of the Pokanoket Wampanoag people, one of the original 69 communities. He's also in a community that bordered Narragansett territory. And after the plague swept through and the Wampanoags were so greatly affected, whereas the Narragansetts were not, the Narragansetts were moving to absorb the Wampanoag people into the Narragansett Nation. So Massasoit thought it was in the best interest of his people to sign a peace treaty with the colonists as allies against Narragansett encroachment.
So the English and the Wampanoag enter a treaty that would protect both groups from their enemies.
I don't know if you want to call Massasoit one of the first politicians back then when the colonists landed, but he knew what he had to do to protect his people.
Massasoit spoke some English, but he relied on one person to tell the English what the Wampanoags needed. His name was Squanto.
Squanto has something very special, right? He knew about both cultures. He knew about English culture, and he knew about his own culture.
Tisquantum, who most people know as Squanto, was a Patuxet Wampanoag person. He had been kidnapped, and he was in Europe when the plague swept through from 1616 to 1618. With the help of an Englishman named Thomas Dermer, he was able to make his way back to Patuxet, where he found his whole community was decimated. I think it's easy to feel for him. You know, everyone he knew was gone.
Squanto comes to live amongst the English sometime in the spring of 1621, and that's when Squanto taught the English how to plant corn. He sticks around because that's another form of diplomacy. You think about it, it's a new homeland, new land for them, you know. So the first thing you got to think about, how do I get food? Sure, I can fish, but I'm thinking about getting vegetables too, and Squanto taught him how to do that. He spends a lot of time with the English. He is considered to be the English's tongue, their voice.
But a lot of people didn't know that Tisquantum was also a little bit of a troublemaker. He would use the fact that he could speak English to his own advantage, and he would visit Wampanoag communities and say things like, the English at Plymouth, they keep the diseases we're so terrified of and have no immunities to buried underneath the floorboards of their storehouse. You better give me gifts to appease them, or else they're going to dig them up and wipe the rest of us off the face of the earth. And then he'd keep the gifts. And he'd do the same thing to the English. But it's really difficult, you know, the modern Wampanoag person, to look back and kind of look down on Squanto. For all we know, he might have been trying to incite war early on. Who knew better than Squanto, you know, what the English were capable of? He knew them, you know, he spent a lot of time over there. But we'll really never know Squanto's true intentions.
Whatever his intentions, Squanto's actions caught up to him, and Massasoit places a bounty on his head. Because of his value as an interpreter, the English violate their treaty with the Wampanoag by refusing to hand Squanto over. But he soon dies of a fever while under English protection. Squanto's story is a warning of the problems that would eventually grow in Plymouth and even the rest of North America.
Squanto is the perfect example of one of the Indians who helped the Europeans when they got here, and the reason why he was able to speak the language is because he was himself taken as hostage to England, sold off, was educated, and then found his way back to the Americas. And when he got back, he helped the Europeans that were trying to settle learn how to farm, how to take care of themselves in the Americas, because they didn't know what they were doing. And again, he was a translator for different groups. So now let's check out this 92 interview from Dr. Jack D. Forbes and let him break down a little bit of this history.
Well, I thought about it some. I don't know that I have a definitive answer, but I believe that one of the interesting things that happens with Native American people, especially in the 20th century, is that they are, by and large, forgotten about whenever the military battles are over. That is, the popular movies that have taken place and so on are almost always to do with the armed resistance of Native people to conquest, right? But you probably can't even think of a single movie where whatever happens to these Indian people after the battle is ever told about, right? So they might have a couple of guys shaking hands and saying, oh, sorry about the warfare, you know, it was due to a misunderstanding, you know, now we're going to live at peace together, Chief, you know, and everything's going to be great. But you never see what happens after that. I think partly because it's very difficult for the white newcomers to North America particularly to face up to the fact that this isn't just a little romantic set of interludes between knights that are jousting with each other. This is a materialistic and economic war. Not only a war for land, but a war for resources and a war for labor. And in many, many areas, Native Americans were reduced to poverty and forced to become workers and laborers on white people's ranches and so on, in addition to, in the earlier period, being enslaved. So that I think that the white population just wants to bury what they've done to the Native people. They don't want to really know what they did and what they're still doing in some areas.
Could you talk about how Europeans went about capturing Native Americans?
Well, it's not a happy thing, but it illustrates one of the kinds of great lessons that we as human beings have to learn. And that lesson is to be very astute and not allow ourselves to be used against our brothers and sisters. Not allow ourselves to be dupes and to be used in brutal ways against other human beings. Okay, often we don't simply have the information, and the Spaniards were often very direct and very brutal. They just went in and captured thousands of people and rounded them up and took them to market. But in other cases, the colonialists were much more clever. For example, the Portuguese conquered Brazil basically by Portuguese men intermarrying with native people, particularly powerful tribes living along the coast, powerful chieftains. And then, of course, Native Americans value their families very much. Kinship is extremely important. And so, without realizing it, now they've got a new member of the family. He doesn't have the same motives that they have, but there are kinship obligations by means of which this Portuguese guy gradually takes advantage of existing enmities that may exist between Indian groups, maybe some old hostilities, and uses then his relatives against other Indian groups. And pretty soon rewards them with guns and with other weapons and goods for capturing other human beings. And so it starts out small, but as time goes by, it becomes tremendously big operation.
So don't miss the point that Forbes just made, which is that these Europeans didn't just come and take over. They came in, they started mixing into the tribes. They started having children with tribal women and marrying them, and that was part of the way that they made peace with them. And then the offspring of these children, later were more friendly, even more friendly with the Europeans, because these were their relatives now, like I said, half them, half us. So, long story short, they didn't always just come in and just start wars. That's not how it worked. Really, if you read the old documents, you'll see a lot of times they had to come in and make peace. They came in and gave gifts. They came in and paid tributes. They didn't just come over and just take over. That is not how it actually worked. They came in and they mixed themselves into these tribes.
Notice, if you will, the half-caste child. And there are ever increasing numbers of them. Now, what is to happen to them? Are we to allow the creation of an unwanted third race? Should the coloreds be encouraged to go back to the black? Or should they be advanced to white status and be absorbed in the white population? Now, time and again, I am asked by some white man, if I marry this colored person, will our children be black? And as chief protector of Aborigines, it is my responsibility to accept or reject those marriages. Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see, in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black color. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out.
And this is just one of the ways that they use to attack the Indian sovereignty and their identity. They started mixing into the population. And when they did this, then they started leaning towards the more white ones as the true Indians, which is absolutely false. How are you going to be less and less of the actual bloodline and be more of the actual people. That's impossible and ridiculous. And this is what happened. And eventually, it all changed.
In southern Brazil, for example, in the 17th century, there was a period of time in which at least 200,000 or 300,000 Indian people from Spanish Jesuit missions in the Paraguay area are raided and carried off to the coast as slaves, largely by bands of people who are mixed Indian and Portuguese or Indian, but led by mixed blood or Portuguese chieftains who are the founders of Sao Paulo, or Paulistas, they're called in southern Brazil. Other colonialists, example in South Carolina, the English are very astute to also take advantage of existing animosities. And they get some of the tribes to provide a lot of the slaves, and by that mean they acquire, for example, lots of Choctaw slaves from Mississippi. Choctaws are among the largest group that are enslaved and are sold through South Carolina to the West Indies and to New England and held in South Carolina. There are also tribes even west of the Mississippi that get raided and are brought in as slaves. Florida is cleaned up. Firstly, all the Indians that remained in Florida after the Spanish period are cleaned out by the English and sold as slaves in South Carolina.
You say cleaned out?
Yeah, virtually depopulated. Florida is virtually depopulated of its native population. The Indian people who later live in Florida are primarily people moving south to get away from the whites. Seminoles, for example. They moved south from what is now Alabama and Georgia. But the native inhabitants, by and large, are enslaved. They're Christians, they have Spanish surnames, but they're brought north here to South Carolina and become part of the slave population.
So see, this is a big part of the problem with the education system today, and even the way that people tell the story of history, because they tell the story of history as Indians were somebody other than who you're calling Negroes today. But the fact is, the original Indians were what you call Negroes. And you look at the drawings and depictions, and even the medical documents that they was writing about these folks, they make it pretty clear these were mostly, by and large, Negro type folks. The entire reason they were called Indians is because they were dark skinned. You understand? They keep trying to make you believe it's because they thought they were somewhere else and they were calling them those people. No, that's not it. They called them Indians because they were dark skinned folks. So the whole educational system and the way history is taught to us today is conflicted.
The Carolinas were founded in 1663 when King Charles II of England gave 8 of his closest friends an expansive wilderness south of Virginia. These aristocratic settlers created a cosmopolitan colony that became known for its religious tolerance and its exceptionally harsh system of slavery. Charlestown, now known as Charleston, became one of the New World's capitals of the African slave trade.
So this is right when the confusion gets started, because here, like this sign, they're telling you that they were from the Windward Coast and Bance Island, which is actually off of the coast of Sierra Leone. And they're saying, yeah, we just brought them from there and they're here and you can get them. Okay, this is part of the problem, because the majority of any people that were imported from the Caribbean islands, the different islands in the Caribbean. They were not from Africa directly. Now, Sierra Leone, because they mentioned Bance Island, Sierra Leone was colonized in the late 1700s by Black Americans, as they called them. They called them Black Nova Scotians. And it was a mixture of Black Americans, Caribbean island folks, and some Negroes from England. All right? But the bottom line is, how do you take people from Sierra Leone, bring them here, but then they turn around and create a colony for American black folks? Now, these were the folks that fought in the American Revolutionary War on the British side, and this is why they gave them this colony over in Sierra Leone. And it was the first one, just in case people don't realize that Liberia came after this. Sierra Leone was first. Okay, but back to what I was saying earlier, which was the fact that they weren't bringing people from weren't bringing people directly from Africa. And even when they showing you these people, their nose ain't Africans. They got feathers and straw skirts. These are Indians, right? They weren't bringing people from Africa. In this one, it said imported from Antigua. Okay, so at least they were honest about that. Or maybe. I mean, we don't really know. It's just these particular advertisements were the way that they use it. But Antigua, just in case you're not sure, is a Caribbean island. And just like I said earlier, many of the Caribbean islands were ports where they were taking slaves from South America and bringing them back north, and vice versa. Well, let's continue.
Carolinians bought slaves to plant and harvest rice, a crop considered exotic to colonists but familiar to Africans. The Africans' relative immunity to malaria made them coveted laborers on Carolina's swampy plantations. By 1710, African slaves and their African American children made up the majority of the colony's population. Carolina slave merchants also sold American Indians as slaves.
Most of the slaves were actually sold out down to the Caribbean or over to Bermuda because they realized earlier on keeping them near where they had originally come from, in the Carolinas, for example, made it easy for them to escape back to their other tribes.
The practice of Indian slavery in the Carolinas ended only after a bloody conflict between settlers and Indians annihilated the Indian population of coastal Carolina. After the conflict ended, a group of tobacco farmers who shunned slavery migrated to the unsettled northern border of the Carolina Grant. This group founded the new colony of North Carolina in 1712. That year, the British Crown assumed control of both North and South Carolina.
Now that's a perfect example of the way that they lied and changed the story around. You really don't understand that during the period of time that they're saying that they were bringing all these Africans, they really wasn't. They weren't bringing a lot of people in the country at all. And most of the people they were bringing were coming from the Caribbeans. They were absolutely exporting a whole lot more Indians out of the Carolinas at that exact time that they're saying they was bringing all these people in. It's just, but they try to make you feel like they're different folks. And I mean, here's a passage they talk about in 1670 through 1720. Carolinians exported more Indians out of Charleston, South Carolina, than they imported Africans into it. And there are documents to verify exactly that. You know, the biggest problem is that while they were calling people Africans, there wasn't Africans. The majority of the time they were Indians from other parts of the Americas. They were all being taken to the Caribbeans and being sent to the other side of the Americas. And during the period of time that they were saying that there were more Africans in the Carolinas, they weren't Africans. Here's a prime example like this Yamasee War. All right, they're showing you the Yamasee Indians. They were black folks. Indians were who you would consider to be black folks. The original Indians were who you would call Negroes today. And that is all across the whole continent. And there were other sprinkles of different folks, but the majority of the people were Negroes, or who you would consider Negroes. They weren't Negroes. They're Aborigines, Aboriginals. That is who we actually are. Indians is not who we actually are. They were calling us Indians. And again, they were calling people Indians because they were dark skinned. That is the entire reason that they called them Indians. And then after Indian had rank, meaning the term Indian, title Indian had rank, and the monarchs were saying y'all can no longer treat Indians this kind of way, they changed the term and started calling them Negroes. And this passage speaks on that. And it says the common perception that Indians never formed a substantial portion of North America's total slave population has, in part, its roots in the routine reclassification of Indians as blacks. That begins shortly after the British moved toward the establishment of a chattel model of slavery. So understand, once again, they created the term black. They created the term Negro. I mean, these things took you away from being anybody. You're nothing. And that's the reason why they could then turn around and enslave you or sell you, because they wasn't supposed to be treating the Indians that way according to the laws from their monarchy. You know, they were supposed to be paying them, treating them fairly, not stealing from them, they were supposed to be dealing with them in a respectful, up and up manner. That is not what they was doing. And every time they got into a war and took captives, you became a Negro. Just like the Trail of Tears, when black folks didn't want to leave their homelands, you became a Negro. Those people that went out to Oklahoma, they got to stay Indians. But the ones that stayed home, which is the majority, they became Negroes. And there are laws that show you this. And that's the same reason why all the laws for Negroes have Indians in them.
And one of the big factors that happens to native labor and to all labor in systems of extreme oppression is that they're not fed enough. They don't get enough caloric intake. Studies of the California missions, for example, the Spanish missions in California, show that the Indian people in those missions were being underfed. They were malnourished. So it's no wonder that diseases then come along and take their toll. In addition to which, the Spaniards, in the early stages especially, were fighting a lot of battles with Indian people, and a lot of people were killed through military action. And because the Indian population was quite heavy, in central Mexico, for example, there were 20 million people. Well, it's only in this century, in recent years, that there are as many people in Mexico today, in that part of Mexico, as there were before Cortez reached Mexico in the 1520s. Some of the West Indian islands, like Haiti, there are estimates as high as 1 million or more people living on the island. Although we don't know exactly, but there were a lot of people. And so the Spaniards believed at first that they could just kill people off very rapidly. They could always go get more. And but then, of course, that proved to be disastrous.
So all along, there were always tribes that fought with and against the white folks and the Europeans that came here. They absolutely chose sides. There were people who fought against them for their land. There was people who fought against them for their brutality. There was people who didn't like them from the beginning. At the same token, there were some who were automatically attracted to the Europeans and the white ones, and they wanted to, they mixed it up with them. They bred with them, and they took them in, But one thing about it, and this is part of the story that, a lot of times gets left out, is there were always groups of Indians that were slaughtering these folks. So there were a lot of wars because they came over here and started trying to take over and started trying to convert people. And the people that were here were like, no. And they started killing them. And they started killing each other. Then they started using other ones to kill them because, see, they could have never, ever won any war, even with all the guns they had, long-term wise, without using other Aboriginals or Indians against another group of Aboriginals or Indians. That's the only way that it worked. And if you think about how things are going today, it's still the same way. You have groups of us who tend to side with these same type of folks, the same mentality exists, that they should be superior and they should run things and they can impose their beliefs on somebody else. And then there's those of us who are completely against it. So I'll say this, there was really never a time in history that we know of where everybody was just harmonious and there were no battles. There was always some battles, even prior to the Europeans arriving here. There was always battles between the different tribes. Europeans came in and worked themselves in favor of probably whoever they thought were the stronger of the tribes, because they didn't want to, why would they join the losing team, right? They obviously looked for the stronger, and they made treaties with them. They married their women, had babies with them. Those babies became members of the tribe, and that lineage continued all the way up to today, to the extent now you don't recognize there's no leaders of any of the Indian tribes, so-called Indian tribes today, that have Aboriginal leaders. None of them. None of those folks are Aboriginals. Not any of them. I would love to see somebody pull out the Aboriginal tribal leader of any of these so-called recognized tribes, those federally recognized tribes today. You won't see them. I probably, if I had to guess, I could think of two maybe, and that would be the Shinnecock or the Pequot. Both of those are New English tribes, meaning they're in today's New England states. But other than that, all over, at least in the United States, these people that are claiming to be tribal chiefs, they're pretty much white folks. They're not Indians. They're just not Indians, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but reality is reality, and we're going to keep the reality going, and that's the reason why I'm even doing this series, because we need to know who the real folks were. So once again, Canyon was right, and he continued to shed light on these topics, and we're going to continue with the series and keep being better informed. Just to be clear, this is not about division or being against any other group of people, not against anybody. We're trying to learn our history. We need to learn our real history, because the history that we've been taught is a lie, and it's time for it to stop. And we're going to keep digging. We're going to keep learning. We're going to keep getting more intelligent on this subject, and pretty soon we'll be free in our mind, and that's where it all starts. Until next time, y'all.